What is going on? We are here. We're live on RK Outpost Live for another House of the Dragon review. This time it's for episode 4, and I'm joined by someone who's usually in the background, usually modding, but she's watching this. She's enjoying the show too. So we're joined by Steph, my nerdy hom. What's up, Steph?
Hi. Yeah, I am enjoying the show. It's nice to look forward to Sundays for House of the Dragon. I was watching Game of Thrones all the way through season 8, and yes, I was disappointed with season 8. But it was something that I looked forward to. I looked forward to Sundays, getting together with some of my friends and watching Game of Thrones. So it's nice to look forward to that on Sundays.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy that this actually does feel like that now. Like I'm excited for 9 p.m. Well, not 9 p.m. because I usually do stuff after my stream for a little while. But as soon as that's done, I watch this series, which is not something I thought I'd be looking forward to. Pretty famous. I made a couple of videos saying I thought that this was going to be trash. I thought it was going to be woke garbage. And, you know, who knows what the future holds for this entire season and this entire series. But so far through the first 4 episodes, I'm really enjoying it. We're going to get some spoiler-free thoughts about this episode, and then we'll hop into going right through kind of everything that happened and our thoughts about what's happening, where it's going. But, yeah, it's definitely surprised me. I did not think it was going to be good, but that's why we actually watch it, I suppose. So we can freely admit, hey, I was wrong about the way this show was marketed. Other shows out there like Rings of Power, I feel like I was pretty much fucking spot on, but you got to have that open mind when you actually consume that thing. And so far for me, House of Dragon's been awesome.
It has been. It's been great. It's been really enjoyable, and I've loved every episode so far. We'll talk about this one, but yeah, so far it's been really intriguing. With it feels like season 1 and 2 of Game of Thrones, really.
Yeah, a little bit. I still think that, to me, it's missing a little bit of the kind of mystery and intrigue that we saw from Game of Thrones, because you had the supernatural stuff with the White Walkers going on. In this one, it almost seems like they're replacing that kind of mystery with, Aegon's vision, Song of Ice and Fire, the prince that was promised. It's like, well, we saw how all that shit happened, so I don't really want to hear about that. I don't really want to hear about that stuff in this show, but that seems to be what they're replacing it with, which is kind of one of the frustrating things. Maybe they'll like very closely connect these. I hope they just kind of focus on what we have going on. And I didn't think that in episode 1 we'd have a reference to A Song of Ice and Fire and what Aegon's vision was. But then also in episode 4, they bring back the dagger. And oh, by the way, that's the fucking prince that was promised, prophecies written on the fucking dagger, all this shit. So we'll get into all of that. But let's say hi to the chat as people start to roll in, and then we'll start to give our thoughts, and then we'll actually dig into it. I Am Absolutions here. Powerhouse G is here. Mark Hendricks, Spazzy Me, Rye Denny Tate, The Sleeping Dutchman. Jay Bling says late. Bye. Well, I guess he didn't stick around. So bye. What else? Yeah, you guys are really upset that I was a couple minutes late. My bad. I had to take a phone call. I was getting ready to go live, and then I had to take a phone call real quick. But these things happen. My fault. Well, not entirely. No, not entirely. I see 187. I see Phil's here. I see green-haired anti-liberal. I see Mark Hendricks. I see Mug Thulhu. I see Garrett Wright. I see Charlie Bray, Diora, Judah Khan, Fox. Everybody's here hanging out. Thank you guys. I appreciate you all being here. And now let's just give spoiler-free thoughts. So episode 4, King of the Narrow Sea. That's the title of this. And from the preview, you do know that Daemon is coming back. Daemon's coming back to King's Landing. How is he going to be received? That's the question a lot of people probably have on their mind when they're going in to watch this, because we got to see the preview. And overall, I think that this episode is the first episode for me that I'm like, this is a little unnecessarily slow. I feel like it didn't need to be quite as long as it did. It's still good. And this series is all about moving these chess pieces around to inevitably get to Dance of the Dragons. And that's what will happen. Obviously, there's some very prominent players right now that things are being set in motion. The relationship between Daemon and Rhaenyra, obviously, it becomes a little bit different in this episode before we get to some spoilers. Overall, still really good. And I think the dialogue is great. I think Paddy Constantine as King Viserys is really good in this, and we get to see a moment where he's not this weak king that everyone perceives him to be. We see a moment where he very much is like the dragon. You see the dragon come out in Viserys because of how mad he gets at something that happens. But overall, he does feel like he's kind of being forced into doing something that he didn't want to necessarily do with Rhaenyra. What are your thoughts about this, just in general, Steph? Spoiler free.
I agree with you on everything you said. I do think that this episode was slow, especially in a part that we'll get to. It was, I think it was unnecessarily longer than it should have been. And every single character in this show really, or I'm sorry, in this episode, you really feel for them, feel for everything they're going to. I like how they kind of juxtapose certain scenes with each other. And there were a lot of callbacks to, there's a lot of setup at the beginning that really paid off at the end too. So this was kind of a slower episode, but it was still really good.
Yeah. And I think it's definitely worth watching. And I think it's going to be a very important episode to see what's going to happen next. One of the things I do like in this series, even though we've been told over and over again that, it's all about this feminist perspective and things like that, that gets addressed and brought up. And there's several times in not only this episode, but in this series where Rhaenyra's like, it's not really fair that I can't do this because I'm a woman. And people are kind of like, well, I mean, yeah, but life's not fair. You are a woman. This is how it is. You know what I mean? And it's almost this like ladder of being oppressed. And Rhaenyra is like complaining about all these things that are happening to her in her life, which are those things fair? No. Is this supposed to kind of replicate things that have happened in our past? Yes. But also people are right there to say, you realize how lucky you actually are, right? Like the idea that you actually have a choice somewhat in who you're going to marry, that's kind of crazy for a lot of people in your position. You should like feel a little bit empowered by that. Not many people get to do that. Or Daemon mentions when she's like, someone's going to sell me off, or my father just wants to sell me off for someone with the castle. And Daemon's like, there's fucking worse things to be sold for than that. Like everyone's very quick to kind of put what she's talking about, what she's complaining about in perspective.
Yeah.
So I didn't necessarily think that's what the way this is going to be. But so far, I think they're doing a pretty good job of that. Before we drop into the full review, couple super chats from Chef Nick Nero for $5. Ryan, there's no good guy in this show. Like a Jon Snow who's doomed to fail, but always virtuous. I agree. I think that's kind of what the message of the entire series almost is. But definitely this book, specifically Fire and Blood, the point of it is to show that when you have this constant battle for power and succession and who's going to rule, everybody loses. Everybody fucking loses. Even if you think maybe someone's going to do the right thing. And then if they do get the right thing, they end up getting punished for it. So that's kind of the message, I suppose. Mark Hendricks for $10. You mean you actually have a real life outside of us on YouTube? Huh, go figure. Well, to be fair, I was taking a call from Jeremy. So I suppose not. I suppose to answer that, the answer to that would be no. But let's get right down to it. When we last left House of the Dragon in episode 3, we saw Daemon and Corlys Velaryon fighting at the Stepstones. The war was not going good. Viserys is finally forced to promise to send them aid. And that pisses Daemon off so much that he just goes and does it without help. He's willing to die rather than accept help from his brother. So when we start this episode out, that's kind of where we left off from episode 3. This episode starts with making sure you remember that Daemon gave Rhaenyra a necklace, and the opening shot is her wearing that necklace that we see. And it turns out that she's actually sitting in a room listening to a huge line of people who have come to ask for her hand in marriage, because King Viserys said, listen, Rhaenyra, you can choose who you marry, but you got to marry somebody, and you got to marry somebody that makes sense. That is your duty. And it's something that she kind of reluctantly does agree to do. It turns out she's actually at Storm's End. You have a Baratheon sitting there next to her. I think I put the name down. Borman Baratheon is sitting right next to her as she's listening to these people. One of them is a Dondarrion, Beric Dondarrion, she basically makes fun of because of how old he is. and says, I want really nothing to do with you. The next person is a young little boy that she's like, so I have one old man coming to ask for my hand in marriage and another one who's a little boy. And it turns out that this little boy is a Blackwood, gets in a little bit of a back and forth with someone in the crowd who's making fun of them for being a child and also just making fun of his family. It turns out that is someone from House Bracken. I don't think they gave a first name. They have a long feud. They have a long history. And as Rhaenyra's like, listen, I've had enough of this for the day and is walking out, they actually draw swords and they fight. And the little boy Blackwood guts this older, I don't know if he was supposed to be a lord or exactly who he was. I think he was unnamed, but just guts him, which is kind of surprising. What did you think about that part, Steph?
I thought that it was interesting that while she's, being courted by these suitors, she's like kind of clinging on to her uncle's necklace that he gave her. So she's still kind of thinking about her uncle. It's kind of like it's telling us that something's going to happen between these two, which it does later on in the episode. So I found it kind of interesting that she was kind of holding on to the necklace. That's the first shot that we see in the show, is that she's holding on to this necklace. I did like that they were at Storm's End, that we actually see Storm's End and everything in that scene. The whole thing is she's just very nonchalant about all these suitors. She doesn't want to get married. This isn't what she wants to do. And she's making that known to the Baratheon that's sitting next to her. Yeah. And as soon as she can, she like ends the trip as soon as she can, which is interesting too. I mean, she has no interest in doing her duty. As far as like at the beginning of this episode, she has no interest in doing her duty and wedding.
Yeah, and that's the thing. When we last left her, she was kind of reluctantly admitting to, okay, I will go ahead and do this. But now, seemingly about a year later, we didn't get, hey, definitely this is a year, but it seems to be that's around the time frame. When you look at the fact that we'll see the queen later, she's not pregnant anymore, and the baby's probably like, I don't know, 6-8 months old, something like that. Who knows? But I think a year is around the timetable that they've established that has passed since the last episode. Again, they don't really tell you straight up how much time has passed. It's kind of up to the viewer to figure it out for themselves, which I kind of like. So I think around a year, which would make Rhaenyra around 18 years old. She was 17 in the last episode. Conveniently for this episode, she's 18, which is probably a good thing. The showrunners probably wanted to make sure that was the case for what we have coming next. And you're right. She's with Sir Criston Cole, who is there. We saw they have a relationship that's continuing to develop, a little bit flirtatious, but Criston Cole is there to escort her while she's trying to do this. She says, just take me back to King's Landing. And while they're going back to King's Landing, as they're taking the trip, they're in a boat. All of a sudden, somebody hears something in the sky, and Caraxes basically dive bombs the ship. And now I don't know exactly why he decided to do that. Did he know Rhaenyra was on there? I'm not sure. But Daemon on the back of Caraxes kind of dive bombs and buzzes the boat, knocks it a little bit just to get everyone's attention. Rhaenyra gets pushed over, knocked against the side, stands up, and she realizes that Daemon has returned. Now she gets
excited by that. Yeah, she's excited by seeing him.
Yeah. Well, they establish immediately in this show, in the first couple episodes, that they do have a relationship that is a positive one. Daemon, even as much as he's upset with Viserys at the moment, he's very fond of Rhaenyra, gives her the necklace in episode 1. And then when Rhaenyra goes to Dragonstone to get the egg back from him, he respects her enough to actually do that thing. And, basically, if that's what you want, princess, then that's what I'll do. That's kind of my duty, whatever. He listens to her instead of, flying off the handle or whatever. So they do have a good relationship. That relationship's going to get interesting here in this episode. And with the realization that Daemon has returned from the Stepstones, all of a sudden the king is waiting to see him. The king is completely all dressed up. He's got his crown on. The throne room is full of people. He's standing in front of the Iron Throne ready. And Daemon walks in. He's cut his hair and he's wearing a crown, which is obviously that's a thing that people notice right away, as now Daemon is wearing a crown. You don't know exactly what this is going to be. Is this going to be a confrontation? Is Daemon going to ask that he should be the heir again? What's going to happen? He walks up with a big kind of axe or hammer or cleaver or something in his hand. And
it was Craggis's hammer.
At Craggis's hammer. So Craggis the crab feeder's hammer. So he walks up to him, holds it in front of him, drops it in front of Viserys and says, put this on the chair, add this to the chair. So giving this gift to King Viserys, and Viserys says something to the effect of, hey, you're wearing a crown now. Do you also call yourself a king? And Daemon replies, they called me king of the narrow seas after beating the Triarchy, but I acknowledge, your grace, there's only one true king. And he bends his head, or he puts his head down and he kneels in front of Viserys. And that's kind of like the tension reliever, because you're like, okay, there's not going to be a fight. And Viserys walks up to him and says, rise, and embraces him. And all of a sudden, Daemon's back in the good graces of Viserys. Everyone's cheering, because I do think, despite the fact that Daemon is a wild card, I think a lot of people like Daemon Targaryen, because unlike Viserys, it seems like Daemon is someone who's very much willing to fight when he needs to. Might not be the wisest thing to do, might not be the popular thing to do what Viserys is doing sometimes, but Daemon is definitely a crowd favorite. At least it seems that way sometimes. And then we cut to a scene outside. Well, first of all, we'll talk about that real quick, Steph. What were your thoughts on the throne room scene, the tension that they built, and ultimately Daemon, saying, hey, I'm here, I'm ready to submit to your will.
It does look like he is trying to mend their relationship. So he is trying to mend that relationship. I do think that a lot of people, including Viserys, thinks that he is a wild card, like you said, but he is willing to do what needs to get done. And I think he just wants to prove himself to his brother. His brother's cast him off so many times. So he does want to prove himself to his brother. What's interesting is that Otto is watching them. And we know that Otto has his own little game, or we see that Otto has his own little game. He likes the brothers when they're at odds. He's always warning Viserys about Daemon. That's one of the first conversations that they have in this show, talking about Daemon. So I think that he prefers them at odds, and seeing them healing their relationship, kind of mending it. I don't think Otto really likes that.
Yeah, for sure. And Otto Hightower has been scheming this whole time, and he's going to get a little bit of comeuppance in this episode at one point. There's also an important thing that Daemon mentions. So when Viserys says, what's of the stepstones, and essentially Corlys Velaryon did not come back to King's Landing. He went back to his home in Driftmark. So Corlys Velaryon's still salty. He's still not ready to come back to King's Landing and, take his place back or whatever. There's obviously bad feelings there. But no one's occupying the stepstones. He says it's filled with, tens of thousands of bodies of dead Triarchy, as a warning to anybody who wants to take it. So the stepstones is still unoccupied by anybody right now. We cut out to, they're talking. It's basically a little feast, a little get together. It's a picnic that they're having outside, like a barbecue in celebration of Daemon returning home, and everyone's eating and laughing. And immediately Viserys and Daemon are talking with Allison, the queen, and it's clear Viserys is so happy that Daemon's back. That is so obvious that Viserys hated the fact that he was at odds with his brother, and he's immediately talking Daemon up and laughing with him and things like that to Allison. And Allison seems a little bit uncomfortable, but is trying to play the role, and is like, hey, Daemon, you haven't seen all these new tapestries that are up in the castle. And Viserys is like, yeah, I'm sure Daemon would love to see this art. And they're laughing together because how stupid that sounds. And Rhaenyra comes up and is like, well, I'd love to see the tapestries. And Viserys is immediately like, oh yeah, the daughter who continues to not do what I'm asking her to do, who's pissed me off. Yeah, you want to go run along and see the tapestries if that's what you want. And Rhaenyra feels properly kind of shunned away. And it's like, all right, well, I guess I'll go see him by myself. Then we get an interesting conversation, because Allison sees her walk away. Allison follows her, and they kind of have this talk, and Allison is like, how did the trip go? Obviously not very well, because everyone's pissed at you. And Rhaenyra is complaining. It's like, I have all these people that are after my hand in marriage, that don't care anything about my bloodline and my Valyrian blood. That's the only reason they're interested in me. And Allison is trying to put those things in perspective and saying, hey, listen, most women would be lucky to have 2 suitors. You have your choice of essentially anyone in the realm. So that's one of those moments I was kind of talking about, where it does seem like Allison is trying to put this in perspective. And Rhaenyra says, that's just going to be my future, is to be locked up in some castle, just having babies. And Allison is has this look on her face of yeah, pretty much my life. And then Rhaenyra's like, oh shit, that is kind of her life, and is kind of apologetic towards that, which I thought was an interesting scene. They're obviously really good friends. They were really good friends. Then Viserys marries her best friend. There's this weird power dynamic between them because one is the heir, but one is the queen. And even though Rhaenyra probably feels betrayed, she also is beginning to realize it's not really the best life what Allison has right now. You can talk.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I agree. I did like the scene between the two girls. I did like that scene. It kind of showed also that Allison is pretty lonely. She doesn't like her life. She doesn't really like what it's become. She is a baby factory. And now Rhaenyra is kind of seeing that too. And I like that they hold hands and they kind of like come together because they're both pretty lonely. They are both pretty lonely. So I like that their friendship is it's kind of forming again. In that. And Allison is upset with Rhaenyra because she did help set this up as well. So she wants the best for Rhaenyra, even though they're kind of at odds because of the fact that like Allison is, was her friend and is now her mom or stepmom. So
I think
like that.
Allison sees it as, listen, I'm doing my duty right now. I didn't necessarily want to do this. My father kind of forced me into this and becoming close to the king, and then he ended up wanting to marry me. Now I'm in this position, and I'm the one who's in this castle, married to someone who I never really thought I was going to be with, having kids with them. But I'm doing my duty. Rhaenyra, why don't you do yours? That's almost kind of what seems her perspective is in the entire thing.
That is her perspective. Yeah.
There's no doubt that they both are lonely.
It's like you're not going to be happy about it. You might not be happy about it, but this is our role and you need to accept that.
Yeah, for sure. Then we have a scene between Rhaenyra and Daemon. Rhaenyra's basically saying, why'd you come back here? I felt like you were pretty happy out in Dragonstone doing your own thing. Why did you come back? And Daemon's like, oh, I really missed home. But Daemon is like admiring the necklace that he gave her. Daemon's kind of looking at her a lot. It's pretty obvious. He mentioned something about her growing up a lot since he last saw her. Little bit of creepy vibes from there between Daemon and Rhaenyra. If you know what happens in Fire and Blood, if you know what happens in Dance of the Dragons, this is not a surprise. If you know the source material, this is what everything has been leading to. So not a surprise that we're finally getting to see that. Also not a surprise that conveniently they made Rhaenyra 18 for this, which is probably a good idea just from an optics standpoint. But they do talk about marriage. They talk about, and Rhaenyra says, listen, look, you're not happy in your marriage. He's like, no, I'm not, but whatever. I'm married to this bronze bitch, this ugly bitch that I don't want anything to do with. But I do whatever I want. I fuck whoever I want. Marriage is a political arrangement. That doesn't mean that that's everything that you're bound to. That's the perspective that Daemon is trying to give to Rhaenyra. And Rhaenyra kind of responds. It's like, listen, my mom was made to just have babies until she died from it. And that's not what I want with my life. She says, I would rather just be in solitude than have to deal with anything like that. And that's not really an option for her. But I do think it's a good insight into what Rhaenyra is feeling and how she doesn't want to end up like her mother, literally just someone who's set to make babies until she has a male baby, has an heir, or until she dies from it, which is what she saw happen to her mom.
And then Daemon gives her his advice. You can't live your life in fear or you'll forsake the best parts of living. And then later teaches her that lesson, which is interesting. It's interesting that like all of this is kind of setting up for what we're going to get later. And I really liked that. I love the setup.
Yeah, I mean, this whole episode is really set up, which is why it's a little bit slow, in my opinion. Now, this part isn't. I love the political intrigue. I love the discussion. I love the dialogue. I thought something we're going to get to a little bit later in the show went on for too long. And I think it was just a little bit wasted time. But we will talk to that when we get there. Then we have one council scene. I think that's the only council scene we have in this episode where they're talking about Corlys Velaryon, who was mentioned earlier, who fought with Daemon, that Corlys Velaryon looks to be trying to make an arrangement with the Sea Lord of Braavos. Now, I don't feel like maybe in Game of Thrones, at least in the TV show, they showed just how powerful like that could be. But you know, when you look at the Free Cities, when you look at the Iron Bank, when you look at all these people not in Westeros, alliances with them can be worth a lot. We saw the Iron Bank come in and just fund people who they were because they were pissed off at the other side. Hey, we'll give you a bunch of money because these people betrayed us. So just that relationship is showing them, and the council knows that, and Viserys knows this. If this is allowed to happen, if this alliance is allowed to happen between Corlys Velaryon and the Sea Lord of Braavos, then that could lead to very bad things. That will ultimately lead to a big war, and that's not something that anybody wants. And I think it was with Laenor. Like, Laenor, the son of Corlys Velaryon, that's the person who's supposed to be married to the Sea Lord of Braavos' daughter. I think that's what they established in that. So they're like, well, we need a marriage proposal of our own. Of course, everybody knows what people are thinking about this. And with Rhaenyra hears this as well. And so she's thinking about it too, because she's in there for the council meeting.
She is. She's no longer the cupbearer. She actually has a seat at the table now, which is interesting.
That's true. They're letting the woman listen.
Yeah.
Not talk.
Table.
Yeah. She can't talk, but hey.
We have a new Master of Ships as well. On the table.
Yeah, well, we had one before, right? I forget who it is. God, some of the names are so hard to keep track of in this. But we did have a couple new council members last time, and we do have a new Master of Ships because Corlys Velaryon's not there. Then we go a little bit to these back and forth segments where we do see Allison just holding a screaming baby alone, trying to take care of the baby. Doesn't look super thrilled, but again, the baby does look like it's probably about 1. She was pregnant in episode 3. That's how we know probably about 1 year has passed. We go back to Rhaenyra, who goes into her chambers. Kristen Cole is watching her door, as always. They're very close. And goes into her chambers, and she sees there's this satchel there. She starts unpacking it. She sees random clothes and also a little piece of parchment, which is a map to something right beside her in her bedchamber. And she goes and she pushes on this where this red X was, and somehow there's a hidden passage in her door. I will say this is one of the criticisms I had of it. It's like I have no doubts that Daemon would know a lot of secrets about the castle and everything like that. That doesn't surprise me. But it was just like without any real setup or introduction or anything. Oh, by the way, there's this secret passage in your room, Rhaenyra.
Yeah, so, and she never noticed it. This character that's so curious about everything that rebels, like she never noticed this secret passage.
Yeah, so I didn't think that was super well done. I felt like maybe they did some setup. Maybe there's some dialogue that I missed at one point. I do feel like if there had been just a couple lines of dialogue, maybe an episode earlier or something, about Viserys and Daemon talking about how, exploring the castle, it's full of hidden secrets and stuff that nobody knows about, unless you've grown up here, shit like that. I think that if that had been set up, maybe it was and I missed it, but I think that would have made that make a ton more sense than just randomly all of a sudden we have a secret passage. Yeah, one of the Maegor secret escape routes. There you go. But hey, where was I? Where was I?
She finds the satchel.
Catch up. Yeah, so she finds a satchel. She gets dressed in all the clothes that are there, and she goes through these passages, leads her down through the bowels of the castle and out to a little passage where Daemon is waiting for her. Daemon is also not in his normal clothes. He's just in a hood, and it's clear they're going to go and explore the city. And they walk through, they see people drinking, they see people fucking, they see shows going on, and it's like a whole new thing for Rhaenyra. She's never really seen the city from this aspect. She's never really lived like this. She's just been protected her entire life. She doesn't really understand this world. Flash over to Allison and Viserys. Viserys is bathing. Viserys looks like shit.
Yeah.
And they've done a really good job in this series of showing, hey, Viserys is slowly deteriorating. And now why is this happening is because he's an unfit king. That's the rumor. That's the lore that's told, that the Iron Throne will actually cut people who are unworthy or who are poor rulers. And we saw him get a cut on his finger, and ultimately now he's got 2 fingers that have been amputated because of that. There's like sores and stuff all over his body. He looks like shit, and he looks worse and worse every single episode. And Allison is there while King Viserys is getting bathed, and they're kind of like rubbing over some of the sores that he has on his body. And she sends the servants away, and she does it herself. And I think it's interesting because this is showing that although Allison does feel lonely and feel like she's doing her duty, she actually does care about King Viserys. She has a tender touch. She felt really bad for him when he lost his wife, and she actually cares about him, which again is interesting, and it's showing that it's not just some fucking torturous thing for her. She cares about the king, even if she doesn't like some of the aspects of what her current life entails. What did you think about? To me, I do think, like we said before, they're doing a really good job of showing Viserys and how he's deteriorating like this.
I do. It's kind of showing that like people think that he is a weak king, and he kind of is, because you know he has love for his brother, and sort of makes a lot of his decisions based on that emotion. And so it's kind of showing people to see him as a weak king, but he's also now weak physically. So it is showing, which is why I feel like, you know, he had to put on like a big show when Daemon came home, because he is very weak, you know, so he has to put on his crown, he has to get his sword, he has to have a lot of people in the room when Daemon comes, because Daemon is, as he said too, his mom preferred Daemon to him because Daemon was a strong fighter. So it's like he has to really put on this show because Daemon is a lot stronger than him, and now it's sort of showing that he is weak, both physically, and people see him as a weak king. Do you sort of feel sorry for him in this? And it is terrible seeing all of his sores all over his body, and he is in a lot of pain. But but Allison is taking care of him. She is doing her duty. She does take pride in doing her duty, you know. So she is doing what she needs to do as his wife.
Yeah, and that'll come into play in a couple minutes here as well. Flashback to Rhaenyra and Daemon. They're watching a play that's being put on in the city, and Rhaenyra doesn't really like this play because they're depicting, hey, look at these 3 possible heirs to the throne for King Viserys. And they talk about Rhaenyra, they talk about baby Aegon, and they talk about Daemon. And Rhaenyra is very surprised by the way that people see her, because everyone's like, oh, should we have a woman on the throne? And everyone's like, no, fuck that. Fuck a woman ruling. That'll never work. And Rhaenyra's like shocked to hear this from the people. They all want Aegon. They kind of want him because he's a boy. That's literally the only reason. They want him because he's a boy. And she's like so upset by that. And she is like, oh, no. She tries to be like, no, boo, boo. And when everyone's cheering. And Daemon's like, you can jest all you want. But at the end of the day, the way these people feel is what matters. It doesn't make it fair. It doesn't make it fair that because you're a woman, they don't want you on the throne. But it is the reality of the situation. So Daemon's like trying to get her to understand that no matter what happens, people are going to have problems with her on the throne. It's going to be a tough uphill battle for her to climb for anyone to take her seriously. And this kind of pisses her off a little bit. She ends up like tasting some random food or something. And Daemon's like, hey, you have to fucking pay for that out here, you know? And she throws it and runs away. And Daemon's like, oh, I'll get her. And there's this little fake chase scene they do as they run through. But she does run into somebody. She runs into Sir Harwin Strong. Now, I don't know if that's going to play, if it's actually going to go the way they do it in the book at all. But there is some things that happen potentially in the future. If that is Harwin Strong, and this is the Harwin Strong we're talking about in the future with Rhaenyra, that might not be the first time they interact. But anyway, he sees her and is like, what are you doing here, princess? What are you doing out at night? Because she had to sneak out. And then he sees Daemon with her as well. And he says, okay, kind of ignores her and lets her go and get away with whatever she's up to. Now, go back to Allison. Allison gets woken up in the middle of the night because the king needs her. Well, the king needs her so he can fuck her. Yeah. And we get a very uncomfortable scene of an old King Viserys on top of Allison Hightower, fucking her as she looks completely uninterested. She's just laying there and looking to the side. It looks like she absolutely hates what she's having to do, but this is her duty, and that's what she's doing. Now, that is completely contrasted with the scene that gets set up next, where Rhaenyra and Daemon go into a pleasure house, and Rhaenyra's like, "What is this?" And Daemon's like, "You know, fucking is a pleasure, right? It can be pleasurable for everybody. This is where people come to get what they want." And he also takes off his disguise and makes her take off hers as well, which makes you wonder if he wanted people to know who they were. They're kind of notable with their fucking hair. And Daemon and Rhaenyra kiss. He puts her up against the wall. It looks like they're about to fuck. She's like really into it. She wants it. Contrasted with what's going on with Allison, who just looks like she's completely under. And that's kind of what they're showing, right? They're trying to show the difference between marriage and sex as a duty versus sex as a pleasure, and what Daemon's trying to introduce Rhaenyra to. Daemon, as he's had problems with before, can't get it up. Daemon can't get it up, gets frustrated and goes away and just leaves Rhaenyra there. And Rhaenyra doesn't really know how to feel about that. She was into it. She wanted it to happen. But as she leaves this brothel, this pleasure house, there's a young boy there that clearly sees her. And you can tell this person knew who she was. And that's going to come into play in a little bit. And I think that was the entire point of this sequence, was to show you how Allison feels about having sex and how Rhaenyra is about to feel about having sex. And I think it does a pretty good job of showing you the dichotomy of those things.
It does. In this like tiny little scene while the king is on top of her, he kind of like makes her look at him at one point, and she does, and she smiles. So it does show that like she does care, even though she really doesn't want to do this. She does care, and she'll do what she needs to do for her king, and that she'll look at him and smile, but then go back to like staring at space. So she does do what she needs to do. She understands her role in everything, even though it brings her absolutely no pleasure whatsoever. I think it's interesting that like Daemon, it does make it seem like this is what he wants, right? He wants Rhaenyra, even at the beginning where the woman tells him like, "I'll bring you a girl with white hair," so it does set up that like he kind of does want Rhaenyra. He wants his niece. But the fact that he couldn't perform was interesting, so he leaves.
Well, Daemon is a character who's constantly seeking validation, right? Like he constantly, his brother's the king, right? And he wants that. He fucking wants that power, and you can tell. But at the same time, he loves his brother. It's not something. Fucking alarms going off. At the same time, he loves his brother and wants to like respect his brother and things like that. But there's no doubt that he feels slighted. He wants to prove who he can be. That's why he went down the stepstones. That's why he fought in this battle. He wants to show everybody who he can be as well. And in this moment of about to get what he wants, he once again can't perform and gets fucking pissed off at himself. And so he leaves. Rhaenyra goes back to the castle and like runs into her room. And Kristen Cole like sees her go into his room and he's like, "What the fuck?" Because she was in the room. He was keeping watch outside her room. She never went out, and all of a sudden she goes in. So Kristen Cole is like, "Hey, princess, are you okay? Like, what's going on?" She doesn't answer. He's about to go tell like the Lord Commander and everything. Something's going on. And she says, "No, don't. It's nothing. Like, whatever, don't tell anybody." And she steals his helmet, lures him inside the room, flirtatiously, playfully, shuts the door, and then kisses Kristen Cole.
She's trying to take what she wants. She's taking that lesson that Daemon just taught her.
And yeah, exactly. She's taking what she wants, and she's still horny because she didn't get off, I guess.
Yeah.
So Kristen Cole and her have had this relationship, this flirtatious relationship, and now she kisses him. So for Kristen Cole, they swear like, "Hey, I'm gonna be chaste, or I'm gonna be chaste. I'm not gonna have sex. I'm not gonna get married. I'm not gonna father any kids." That's like something you do when you join the Knight's Guard, right? Or the King's Guard.
Yeah, he's about to like breach his oath. He takes an oath as a King's Guardsman.
And so he is looking very uncomfortable as Rhaenyra pulls him closer to her bed, as Rhaenyra starts to take off his armor and stuff like that and kiss him. He has a kind of a decision to make. So there is like a power dynamic going on here, because he's a man, but she is the princess. She could make his life a living hell if he doesn't do what she wants. But also, like, he wants it, but if he doesn't if he does do it, he could get killed. Like so many things, so many bad things could happen to Kristen Cole because of this decision.
Yeah.
But he eventually does make the decision to go. Whether or not it was totally up to him or not, that's what happens. Him and Rhaenyra have this very long sex scene. I thought it went on way too fucking long. I thought it was clear that this episode was directed by a woman that wanted to show a woman getting pleasure. I felt like it didn't need to be that long. You could have shown everything they needed to do without it taking up this much time. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think we talked about that last night, about the power dynamic. I think that she truly kind of took advantage of the situation. Yeah, they've flirted in the past. She chose him. So she does like Sir Kristen. You know, they do get along. They do flirt a little bit, but they've never really passed that line. In this instance, she's taking what she wants. So she's kind of abusing her power in a way. At least that's how I saw it. I saw that as an abuse of power. It's this power dynamic. She knows that, you know, they do take this oath. And you can see it in his face. Like he's really having trouble with this. Like, what should I do? This is the princess, this is the person I'm supposed to guard, and she's wanting this from me, but I can get in serious trouble. I took this oath. I'm about to like break my oath, but I'm supposed to protect this woman, and she wants this from me, and I'm not supposed to do this. You see that struggle with him. He plays it really well because he's sort of taken aback by that. And in the end, I mean, if he does want to do this, I mean, you really don't know because of the morning after. He's very awkward about it. So if he does want to do this, then he did it, but you really don't know. It's truly an abuse of her power. I think that's how I viewed it. I was like, well, damn, she's just sort of taking advantage of this guy.
It is like, the thing is, Kristen Cole wants to fuck her, obviously, like does actually want to, but at the same time, it's not just about that. It's about so much more. It's about breaking his oath. It's about potentially fucking his life up. Like all this bad shit can happen from it. There are more ramifications than just having sex with Rhaenyra that he's like trying to consider, and he really is pressured to do it. I think that is the decision he wanted to make, and I do think they show a moment like where she goes to the bed and he stands there, and there's a moment where he kind of like looks back and makes the decision to go. Right.
To do it, yeah.
And I think that's what they're trying to show with that. Overall, went on a little bit too long. You never get to see. Someone made the comment in chat, you never see any tits, you never see Millie Alcock, so they do the whole sex scene without showing her boobs, which I feel like I think that's probably something they wanted to make sure to not show. They do show a lot of tits and stuff like that with other people, especially in the pleasure house and things like that. They never show the lead actresses though. So the lead actress, just so everyone's aware, she is 22. I think Millie Alcock, whatever her name is like 22 years old. Rhaenyra is supposed to be 18 years old here in this sequence. So for anybody that's worried about the creep shit, there's still people that want to have incest. So there's creepy stuff that goes on, but you do have to point that out. Now, so Kristen Cole, that happens. Now, right after that scene, Otto Hightower gets alerted that a messenger from the White Worm has a message for him. And he goes out to the grounds, and the boy that saw Rhaenyra is there, has a message for him. So now we know that Otto's about to know that Rhaenyra was up to something. We don't know all the details about what he's about to be told, but we know that Otto's about to find this out. Now Daemon wakes up, and he's clearly drunk. He's clearly hungover, and he's wakes up in a room with Mysaria, so his old whore, who is now given up being a whore and is now kind of the master of whisperers. She's actually the White Worm.
She's the White Worm.
So that's kind of her role now. That's not really laid out completely in detail, but if you could put the pieces together and realize that, plus if you know the character from the book, you know that that's eventually where it goes. And she is like, I basically made sure that you were sleeping here tonight and not just out making a fucking fool of yourself. You can pay for the room when you leave. And she gives Daemon something to cure his hangover. He's like, fuck that. I don't want to get cured from my hangover. I just want to I want to stay blurry. Like Daemon wants to be in this state. He wants to be hungover. He wants things to be fuzzy. He doesn't want any fucking help from anybody. It's kind of the feeling you get from Daemon. Then you go back You go back to Viserys because Otto is telling King Viserys what he knows. Otto says Rhaenyra and Daemon were spotted in a pleasure house coupling. Viserys gets really fucking mad. Wants to know who the source is, wants to know who he heard this from because he doesn't want to believe that it happened. Now, to be fair, they didn't actually have sex. They did go to a pleasure house. They did kiss, but they didn't have sex. Allison is overhearing all of this happen. So Allison goes to talk to Rhaenyra in by the weirwood tree. A lot of these conversations are happening in front of this weirwood tree. Just to put that out there, which I don't know if that's going to come into play. I don't know if that means something in the future. If they're going to be able to show that that's how some people, like someone like Bran, could potentially know about these things that happened because all these conversations happen in front of the weirwood tree. I don't know. That's just it's a weird thing that all these conversations between Daemon and Rhaenyra, between Rhaenyra and Allison, between everybody, a lot of it happens in front of this weirwood tree. But maybe it's just because they want you to see that visual. Either way, Allison says, my father said that you and Daemon fucked. I know you Targaryens have queer customs. Tell me if this is true. And when Rhaenyra first gets there, it's like, hey, tell me what happened last night. And Rhaenyra's like, oh, fuck. Does she know that I just fucked Kristen Cole? And then it's like, no, you and Daemon. And Rhaenyra's like, I didn't do it. I didn't do anything. Nothing happened. She denies being with Daemon, or not being with him. She denies having sex with Daemon. Yeah, we went out to the town. We got drunk, but he went home with a whore. We never had sex. Nothing like that happened. Then she goes the extra step and says, my maidenhood is intact. To question my maidenhood is improper. And Allison then feels a little bit bad for questioning her, believes what Rhaenyra is saying. And to be fair, Rhaenyra didn't lie to her about Daemon. She did lie about still being a virgin.
Right. Yeah, she's technically not lying. And she swears on her mom that she never had sex with Daemon. So she's technically not lying. She's just not admitting the whole truth. She's not telling her the whole truth.
Right.
In regards to Daemon, she is lying about her virtue.
Yeah. And before, with what Allison did witness between the conversation between Otto Hightower and Viserys was Viserys is like, no, you've been manipulating me for a long time. Don't act like you think I'm stupid. I'm not that stupid. I see what you're doing. And you are bringing this to me, this unverified information, because you want to ruin Rhaenyra's reputation, because you want your own blood on the throne. The series does get very animated with that. You are so willing to get your son or your grandson on the throne that you would fucking ruin the reputation of my daughter with no evidence. So that precedes the Allison and Rhaenyra conversation. Then Daemon returns. Daemon returns and is drunk as fuck, immediately gets met by the King's Guard and dragged into the throne room. And you see Viserys dressed. He does not look weak. He does not look ill. He looks fucking pissed, like he's ready for battle. This is Viserys that we don't often see in this series. And he says, he basically walks up. Daemon's on the ground, fucking in front of the Iron Throne, just drunk as shit. And Viserys is like, well, fucking tell me. And Daemon's like, I need to know the allegation first before I can vehemently deny it, and Viserys like, did you fuck Rhaenyra? Were you with Rhaenyra last night? And Daemon, even though they didn't fuck, Daemon doesn't deny it. Daemon essentially accepts this. And Viserys is pissed. Viserys is holding a knife to his throat. Viserys is pissed that Daemon is essentially admitting that he did this. And he says, don't you understand what taking her maidenhood means? Like what that means to marry her off to anybody else? Don't you understand the problems you're causing? And Daemon's like, no, because that doesn't fucking matter. You're the king. The only thing that matters is your word. Why are you so worried about what everybody else is talking about? What you say is the only thing that fucking matters. If you say she has value and can marry somebody, that's all that matters. And Viserys is like, what am I supposed to do now? And Daemon says, let her marry me. Wed her to me. Let her be my wife. And says, you already fucking have a wife. And he says, so? Like Aegon had 2 wives. Why does that matter? We're not bound by these rules. We're not bound by the rules of the fucking normal people. We're Targaryens. And ultimately Viserys says, get out of here, get out of King's Landing, go back to the Vale, go be with your actual lawful wife. Get out of here, stop causing me problems. So you see a Viserys who is so excited for his brother to come home immediately is banishing him again because Daemon just has to continue to Daemon. And even though nothing happened, Daemon pretended like it did. And it makes you wonder if was this Daemon's plan all along? Was it Daemon's plan to be spotted going into this pleasure house? Because they did take their hats off. You could see their hair. They knew who they were. People knew who they were walking through there. So was this Daemon's plan to potentially soil Rhaenyra's reputation enough that maybe he could marry her? That's all the thoughts that are like going through my head as I'm watching this play out.
Yeah, he does have the ambition to be on the Iron Throne. And since Rhaenyra is the heir right now, then it would be advantageous for him to wed her. Even though he already has a wife, the bronze bitch, it would be advantageous for him to wed Rhaenyra. It is interesting as to why like he would admit to sleeping with her even though he didn't. And the only reason would be, okay, have her marry me. It would be for him to potentially be on the Iron Throne.
Yeah. And and obviously that is advantageous for Daemon because it gets him that much closer to what he really wants.
Mm-hmm.
He does want that power. So that's kind of what was going through my head as I watched all this happen. Flip back to Allison and Viserys talking about this, and Viserys essentially believes Daemon when Daemon said it happened, but Allison thinks Daemon's lying about it. Mm-hmm. He's like, listen, Rhaenyra promised me this didn't fucking happen. And I have a tendency to believe Rhaenyra, and we all know that Daemon's just going to do things that we wouldn't normally expect. So I think you have to consider the possibility that like Daemon is lying. Mm-hmm. And finally, Viserys and Rhaenyra talk. Viserys brings Rhaenyra to him, and they have a discussion. We get to see the dagger once again. And Viserys is trying to show again to Rhaenyra, who has a tough time remembering this lesson that Viserys is constantly trying to teach her, that they have responsibilities. They have duties. It's about more than just what you want in life. And shows that the dagger that we have, the same dagger that gets used in Game of Thrones, the same dagger that we've seen before in this series, actually not only is just a dagger, but when you heat it up, it shows a message that Aegon wrote in their prophecy about the prince who was promised. Something that I feel like really got forgotten, I guess, in Game of Thrones, in the series. That was such a huge thing. I'm sure you remember this stuff since you were a massive fan of the series. All the different theories about the prince who was promised and Azor Ahai and all this stuff that really just kind of got thrown to the wayside in the actual series. Whether we ever see George R.R. Martin's books, I don't think that'll ever really happen. Mm-hmm. It wouldn't surprise me if the prophecy is meaningless, because that would be a very George R.R. Martin thing to do. But what were your thoughts about when they mentioned the prince that was promised, Song of Ice and Fire, associated with this dagger?
Well, it kind of, because of the way Game of Thrones ended, whenever they show the dagger, it just reminds me of Arya ending up with the dagger. And then, the prophecy, the prince that was promised, turned out to be like a very lame story and a very terrible ending for Jon Snow, who is supposed to be the prince that was promised. So whenever they bring those things out, it kind of brings me to Game of Thrones and how disappointing it was. But it is, you have to kind of, even though it's hard for you to do, to block out Game of Thrones season 8, you have to really just sort of block out Game of Thrones season 8 because it makes the show more enjoyable, to be honest. And I'm also thinking like, well, if we ever do get that final book, maybe it'll be different. But so far, whenever I see the dagger, I sort of roll my eyes every single time.
Yeah, I think that it is difficult to watch that and not think about all that shit. But also, at the same time, I think them bringing into it is a mistake. Because in the very first episode, Viserys goes on this long rant. It's been passed down to every single heir. Like, this is a very important thing. The Song of Ice and Fire, the Aegon's vision. It's not reality, though. Because not every person in this line of succession, it hasn't always been that way. Specifically, Viserys is would be Viserys' grandfather, the king that was before him, Jaehaerys. It's not like him and fucking Maegor were buddies. Like there was a fucking battle, right? And then Maegor ends up dying. There's no way that prophecy got passed down from Maegor to Jaehaerys. You know what I mean? So the whole premise doesn't make any sense, but I guess they didn't actually show those things happening in this show. So maybe, you're supposed to not think about that, and forget about that, but whatever. I do think that's a dumb thing they continue to do, trying to connect it so much to what we did see in Game of Thrones. Maybe for the normie audience, maybe it works. Maybe they like seeing that. Maybe they like hearing Song of Ice and Fire. Maybe they like hearing Prince That Was Promised. It's not necessarily something that I really fucking care about.
Yeah, I think that the dagger and also the werewood tree is kind of like thrown in there for the normies who are watching it, because the werewood tree being there makes no sense either.
Yeah. Anyway, so they're talking, and Viserys essentially says, like, Rhaenyra, it doesn't matter whether this happened or not. It doesn't fucking matter whether you fuck Daemon. Perception is reality. And Rhaenyra says, listen, this isn't fair. If I were a man, I could have 12 bastards and no one would bat an eye. And Viserys is like, maybe, but you're not a man. You're a woman. There are different fucking requirements. Genders are a thing. He's almost saying, listen, life's not fair, but this is the reality of the situation, Rhaenyra. And because of this, you're going to force my hand. You're going to force me into making you marry Laenor Velaryon. And Rhaenyra essentially says, okay, but if I'm going to be forced to do my duty, you have to too. Because you and I both know there's somebody whispering in your ear that doesn't have the best thoughts of the realm at hand. And that's Otto Hightower. Otto Hightower has been doing these things. Otto Hightower spread this to ruin my reputation because he wants Aegon on the throne instead of me. And Viserys takes that under advisement and does exactly that. He confronts Otto Hightower. And he basically says, listen, you were the hand before I was king, and I kept you on his hand. You did a great service to the king before me, to my grandfather, all these things. But I can't trust you anymore. It's clear that you're thinking about things other than what's best for the realm. So even though you've done a great duty over the course of your life or the course of your career as Hand of the King, you were nothing before you were Hand. Now you have all this power in the world. How long did it take for you to start making decisions to benefit you instead of the realm? And it's a pretty good scene, I think. I think Paddy Considine does a good job in it. It was a long time coming for this decision, but he takes Hand away from Otto.
He does. Both of these scenes were really good. The scene with Rhaenyra and with Otto. They were both done very well. I like that he continues to put Rhaenyra in her place. She tries to fight back, but she's constantly just being put in her place and really making her put things in perspective for her. Yeah, she wants to live a life, but you have duties. And if you really want to be taken seriously as heir to the throne, then you really need to fulfill these duties because they're important. You can't just do whatever you want. And that kind of contradicts the advice that Daemon is giving her, the advice that she's actually listening to, letting her take whatever she wants freely without any consequences. And her father is telling her something completely different. And then the scene with Otto was really good because he's telling her, he sees all of these things. He sees that Otto is putting his daughter there in his time of mourning. He's not an idiot. He's not stupid. He sees what Otto is doing. So I do like that. Both of those scenes were really good.
Yeah, I think it's good. And once again, I think that Paddy Considine as King Viserys is a really fucking strong part of this show. Because you're able to sympathize with him and understand where he's coming from and realize the great pressure that he feels like he's under to keep the realm together. And again, something I wish that they would have done a better job of explaining, perhaps, other than what they did in that opening scene, was just how beloved and well looked upon the previous king was, King Jaehaerys. It was a time of relative peace and prosperity, in comparison to other things that had been happening. A lot of fucking fights, a lot of bad things happening for the people of Westeros. But King Jaehaerys, it's hey, we're going to build the King's Road. We're going to make things better for everybody. We're going to constantly make these improvements. People like Jaehaerys a lot. So Viserys feels the need to keep all of that together. He wants to have that same reputation. He doesn't want the realm to fall into chaos. And the more and more things that he tries to do, it seems like the more and more, the closer and closer he gets to that chaos happening, to the point where now he needs to make Rhaenyra marry Laenor Velaryon.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then the last scene is an interesting one. You see a maester walking into Rhaenyra's room and, you know, dropping off a little potion or something that was brewed for her, a drink. And she's like, oh, what's that? He's like, oh, well, you know, it makes sure that there's no unwanted complications from any decisions that you may have made. It's the morning after pill.
Yeah.
That's what it is. The king has had a maester go to Rhaenyra for a morning after pill to make sure that if she did fuck, that no baby comes from it. So that's the way it ends, with Rhaenyra just staring at this plan B pill, basically, that's been put in front of her. Overall, again, this sets up so much, because this coming battle that's going to happen, where you have different people taking sides for whoever they think should actually take the throne. A lot of it gets set up in this with Otto Hightower scheming and Viserys basically calling him out for it. Otto Hightower and Allison Hightower do have a role to play in the Dance of Dragons, at least the start of it. Criston Cole has a role to play. He's going to get a little bit upset at Rhaenyra for some things that might happen in the future. So they set that up today. Also, Rhaenyra's entire reputation, shall we say, it continues on. There are whispers and things that happen. One of the reasons that I don't think the Valyrian should have been black is because specifically some kids that Rhaenyra may or may not have in the future, there's questions as to whether that's Laenor's or not. Because Laenor likes dudes. They think maybe Rhaenyra, maybe these aren't his kids, something like that. Well, how will you fucking know that? Like, you would know if they were his kids, right? You would know if they were Laenor's kids, because they might look a little bit like him. That's all I'm saying. So I don't know. And when you change things like that, you do change things. Maybe they won't do that. Maybe they won't follow that part. But I don't know. It's just out there. But this sets up a lot of what's to come in Dance of the Dragons. Don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. Sorry.
So when I stop talking, it means you start talking. That's how this works. Otherwise, it's a boring stream.
No, absolutely, I do. I wonder if that's why they cast such a light-skinned actor. I mean, he is very light-skinned but they did cast a light-skinned actor, so it might work. As to the question of like the birth of any of her.
We're basically talking about Quarter Black Garrett, right?
Yeah,
that's what we're talking about.
Yeah, so they did cast like a light-skinned actor, so maybe it could work in that regard. But I don't know, we'll see. Overall, I did like this show. I did like also that like she's looking at that little tea that the king brought her, just because it also shows like the distrust that he has in her still.
100%. Yeah, that's the indication that he doesn't believe her. And I mean, he's kind of right. She's hiding things, obviously. Her maidenhood's not intact. She slept with Criston Cole. So it's kind of like, yeah, he doesn't trust me, but should he? Like, there are no good people in these stories, right?
No.
Everybody's making mistakes. Everybody's lying to each other. I would say that right now, Viserys, I guess, would be a good person in that he does truly feel like he's trying to do best for the realm. But I will say, if he was trying to do that, he wouldn't have married Allison.
That is true.
He wouldn't have married Allison if he was making all the right decisions. That was not the right decision. That was one that he wanted to do for himself, as opposed to for the good of the realm. So even Viserys, isn't necessarily doing the right things here. I think I did make a mistake earlier when we were talking in the very beginning about Corlys marrying, or Corlys having someone marry the Sea Lord of Bravo's son. It's obviously his daughter that's marrying the son of the Sea Lord. So probably the same one that King Viserys didn't want to fuck because she was 12 years old.
Yeah, it is her.
Yeah. But let's hit some of these super chats that came in while we were talking. Thanks for being here, guys. I appreciate it. What do we got? Mark Hendricks for $10. Oh, we already said that one, Mark. Chef Nick Nero for 10. I really wish they go more into the faceless men. I know it's not in this storyline, but it would be better than a Jon Snow show, a show about assassins. I mean, look at Assassin's Creed game. I guess that would be cool. I kind of got tired of the faceless men. I got tired of them in Game of Thrones because I felt like there was just too much like true like mystery to them. I don't know. I see every day's been putting the same question chat about Daemon running through arrows without a helmet scene. I like that scene. If Daemon hadn't had any repercussions, then I wouldn't have liked it because it was clearly reckless and clearly like almost a suicide run type of thing. And yeah, would he have gotten that far without getting shot? Probably not. But he does get shot with 3 arrows, right? He gets pretty fucked up.
Yeah, he takes some hits.
So even though they do kind of stretch the realism of it by having him miss so many arrows miss him, he does eventually get hit. So I think that's the important part about that scene. Brian Bresnay for $10. I was thinking this whole episode, Daemon was following his motivations, gain his brother's favor and courting Rhaenyra. He bailed because he actually cares about her. He does actually care about her, which is why he wants her. In terms of him bailing, I wouldn't say Daemon really. I don't think he bailed. I think he would have had. I think he would have fucked. But again, it's like this impotence that he has keeps coming into play. So,
I agree.
Mark I. Hendricks for 5. That scene with the king, cringe is not a strong enough word. You need to make up an entirely different word for something like that. If you mean the scene of him and Allison fucking, it's supposed to make you uncomfortable, right? Like that's what they're trying to show is this is the reality of duty. This is the reality of this time period. This is the reality of life. So I don't know. I felt like it was supposed to make you uncomfortable, and it absolutely did.
Yeah.
Chef Nick Nero for $5. Damien's been runner-up his entire life, even though he's stronger and I guess better looking than his brother, who was born a few years before him. 100% Daemon has that. That is his like motivation. You can tell that's how he feels about all this shit. So overall, I like this episode. I would say a lot of people are saying this is one of the best episodes so far. I definitely wouldn't put it at 3. I probably wouldn't even put it or as good as 3. I probably wouldn't even put it as good as I thought the second one was. Maybe better than the premiere. Maybe a touch better than the premiere. But a little bit too much lingering for the sex scene with Rhaenyra and Kristen Cole. It was like sex scenes or whatever. This is fucking Game of Thrones, right? But it was unnecessarily slow. And it really was like, hey, look at Rhaenyra. She's really taking what she wants. She's getting pleasure out of this. I was like, okay, I don't need quite that much. Even the scene in the pleasure house seemed to take a little bit long as well.
It did. So. Yeah, it was the pleasure house scene was very slow. It's like, okay, we get it. We're in a pleasure house. So that dragged on way too long, as did Rhaenyra's sex scene. It just dragged on a little bit. It lingered way too long. I think episode 3 is a lot better than this episode, but I did like all of the intrigue of this, especially Viserys. Viserys really stood out in this episode for sure.
Yeah, and we'll see what happens in episode 5. Obviously, in episode 5, they're trying to set up this union, this potential marriage proposal between Laenor and Rhaenyra. So things aren't probably going to go exactly how they plan. We'll see how they do it in the show. I'm looking forward to that. I don't know when they're going to do the full jump forward and change actors and actresses. I can't say I'm really looking forward to that because I do think that Rhaenyra is. I think she's really good. Like I think she's fucking awesome in this.
Yeah, it's always you always get taken aback whenever they do change actors and actresses, and because you've grown accustomed to watching a certain actress play a role. And I do like the actress that plays Rhaenyra. I think she's doing an excellent job. Not too sure how it will play out when they do that big time jump and they get a different actress to play her. But so far, I really like the actress that's playing her. And I think she's doing an excellent job. So I don't know. I'm a little wary about it. It's going to be a jolt for sure, but we'll see.
Yeah. And I see Natasha Redding saying that this is the most woke thing on TV. Even the after the show stuff says that let's see, even after show for telling us this, I think that it's funny because listening to that woman director like talk about, I'm a woman and this is a woman's perspective and a woman, this is how I'm shooting this woman's scene. And it's like, it's so funny because if they are trying to get this message across in the show, they're not doing a very good job of telling it. Because like I said, every time that Rhaenyra is like, well, this isn't fair. If I were a man, I could do, then all the men are like, I mean, yeah, life's not fair, but this is the fucking reality. Your life's really not as bad as you think it is, Rhaenyra. Look at all these other people. Look at these fucking poor people, these people that have nothing, that are dying in the streets for nothing, these fucking worthless people. Look at your life compared to theirs. You know what I mean? So it's all about kind of showing these different levels of suffering that people are actually going through in this time period. So every time they do bring that up, which is part of this, like that's part of this story inherently, is that people don't want Rhaenyra there because she's a woman. They don't want a woman as the ruler. They want a king. It's the same reason that Rhaenys was passed over. You know what I mean? So, and it's funny because all of it's leading up eventually to actually Game of Thrones season 8, where we see what happens when a woman gets in charge. You see Cersei, you see Daenerys burn everything to the fucking ground.
Yeah.
And that's at the end of this entire plot, assuming that they don't drastically divert from the books, you'll see that it doesn't matter who's on the fucking Iron Throne. It doesn't matter whether it's a woman controlling these motivations, if it's a man. Everything's fucking shitty. Everything's terrible, and everyone dies. Like that's the message that comes through. So I don't know if they're doing a very good job of showing that, if that's their message.
I know. I'm not too sure if this woman is familiar with Game of Thrones, but when I was watching like the after credits and she's talking about directing these scenes, in my mind, I was like, God, you're so full of shit. Like that's not what's coming across in the show at all. When she's just like, as a woman directing this, I wanted, the woman to come through. It's like that actually doesn't translate. But sure, go ahead and talk about as a woman shooting these scenes. Honestly, I just felt like she was full of shit.
Yeah. So far, like, obviously that narrative is a part of this story in terms of a woman. Like, it's not fair that this happens to a woman, but there's also like shitty things that happen with men too. Like men are always fucking put in danger. Men are constantly fucking getting killed for shit that they probably shouldn't be. You know what I mean? So I think that's part of what they're doing well in this show, is whenever that comes up, they provide a counter to that.
Yeah.
Whenever Rhaenyra says, I could do all this shit if I were a man, Viserys like, well, you fucking can't though. It's not reality. Gender is real. This is the fucking reality, Rhaenyra, and you have to operate within those boundaries. There's always people that kind of bring her back to reality.
That's what I like about it. I do like that. She's constantly trying to push and push and push, and there are people that are like, that's not reality though. Sorry.
Yeah. But we'll see, I guess. I do think that there's going to actually be some fucking action, hopefully, in episode 5. I don't know when they're going to do the time jump, though. I really don't know about that. Because to me, the time jump is the one question I do have. Because right now, I know I like Millie Alcock or Millie Alcock. I don't know how to pronounce her name. I say Alcock because it looks like that's how it's said to me. But when they have Emma D'Arcy playing older Rhaenyra, am I going to like the way the character is portrayed? I don't know, because I haven't seen it yet. So that's a question mark I have. We'll see what happens going forward. Overall, good episode, a little bit slow, and I'm really looking forward to next week.
That's one thing. They make you look forward to the next week's episode, which is good.
100%. All right, guys, but thanks for hanging out with us. Appreciate the super chats. Appreciate people in chat. 300 people watching us talk a little bit about a show we're actually enjoying. And I'm sure if we are not enjoying it, we'll be the first to tell you when that happens. But we appreciate you. We'll talk to you guys later. Peace.